Have you ever wondered how someone could lead a double life, fooling everyone around them with a fabricated identity? Meet Clark Rockefeller, a man whose name echoed with prestige, wealth, and mystery. But beneath the surface, nothing was as it seemed. How did he manage to deceive so many for so long? What secrets lay hidden behind his carefully constructed facade? To understand how Clark Rockefeller came to be, we need to go back to the beginning. Born in 1961 in a small village in Germany, Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter was an ambitious young man with dreams far beyond his humble origins. Determined to escape the constraints of his upbringing, he moved to the United States in the late 1970s, armed with nothing but his wits and a knack for storytelling. In America, Christian began weaving a tapestry of lies, adopting various identities to fit his narrative. He started small, posing as a student, a film producer, and even a physicist. Each persona was meticulously crafted, each lie more elaborate than the last. But it wasn't until the late 1980s that he assumed the identity that would make him infamous. Clark Rockefeller. By claiming to be a member of the esteemed Rockefeller family, Christian gained access to high society, forming relationships with influential people and even marrying into wealth. His charm and confidence were his greatest assets, allowing him to deceive those around him effortlessly. But as with all lies, the truth was bound to surface eventually. As Clark Rockefeller, Christian Karl Gerhardsreiter seamlessly ingratiated himself into the elite circles of American society. From the moment he adopted the Rockefeller name, he knew he had to play the part to perfection. And so, he did. Clark's first move was to settle in New York City, a place where old money and new ambitions collide. He attended exclusive parties, mingling with the crème de la crème of society. His charm was intoxicating, his stories captivating. He spoke of private jets, family estates, and influential relatives, all with an air of casual nonchalance. No one questioned his authenticity. After all, who would dare doubt a Rockefeller? But Clark's ambitions didn't stop at social acceptance. He set his sights on marriage, knowing that a wealthy spouse would cement his place in high society. Enter Sandra Boss, a successful businesswoman who fell under Clark's spell. They married in a lavish ceremony, surrounded by the very elites Clark had so carefully deceived. Clark portrayed the image of a doting husband and a loving father, all while continuing his elaborate charade. He purchased a luxurious townhouse in Boston, filled it with expensive art, and hosted extravagant gatherings. To those around him, Clark Rockefeller was the epitome of success and sophistication. Yet, behind the facade, the cracks were beginning to show. Sandra started to notice inconsistencies in Clark's stories, but he always had a plausible explanation. His web of lies was so intricately woven that even the most skeptical had difficulty seeing through it. As we peel back the layers of Clark Rockefeller's illusion, we uncover the lengths to which he went to maintain his deceit. From falsifying documents to fabricating entire backstories, his commitment to the lie was unparalleled. But how long could he keep up the act before the truth finally caught up with him? The illusion of Clark Rockefeller's perfect life began to crack when his marriage to Sandra Boss fell apart. The divorce was not just a personal failure for Clark. It was the beginning of his downfall. Sandra, who had once been captivated by Clark's charm, now saw him for what he truly was, a master manipulator and a fraud. The custody battle over their daughter, Ray, would be the turning point that exposed Clark's web of lies. Clark was determined to maintain control over Ray, believing that losing her would mean losing the final piece of his meticulously crafted facade. The custody hearings were intense, with both sides presenting their cases in a courtroom filled with tension. Sandra, armed with evidence of Clark's deceit, painted a picture of a man who was not who he claimed to be. She revealed inconsistencies in his stories, questioned his background, and slowly began to unravel the Rockefeller illusion. As the court proceedings continued, Clark became increasingly desperate. He resorted to drastic measures, including fabricating more lies and attempting to discredit Sandra. But the more he struggled, the more his true identity began to surface. Investigators started to dig into his past, uncovering a trail of deception that spanned decades. The climax came when Clark, in a final desperate act, kidnapped Ray during a supervised visit. This reckless move not only endangered his daughter's life, but also sealed his fate. Law enforcement launched a massive manhunt, and the media frenzy that followed brought Clark's story to the forefront of public attention. The once charismatic and enigmatic Clark Rockefeller was now exposed as Christian Carl Gerhardt's writer, a con artist whose house of cards had finally collapsed. His arrest marked the end of his elaborate charade, but the impact of his deception would linger for years to come. As the custody battle raged on, authorities began to dig deeper into the enigmatic life of Clark Rockefeller. What they found would astound not only the courtroom, but the entire world. The turning point came when a determined investigator stumbled upon a crucial piece of evidence, a fingerprint taken from Clark years earlier. This fingerprint would become the key to unlocking his hidden past. Running the print through national databases, the investigators made a startling discovery. Clark Rockefeller was, in fact, Christian Carl Gerhardt's writer, a German immigrant who had arrived in the United States decades earlier. The revelation sent shockwaves through law enforcement agencies and the media alike. How could someone live such an elaborate lie for so long? The investigation intensified as authorities began to piece together Christian's true identity. Born in a small village in Germany, Christian had come to America with dreams of grandeur. Over the years, he had adopted multiple aliases and spun intricate lies to climb the social ladder. From pretending to be a British aristocrat to claiming Rockefeller lineage, Christian's deceit knew no bounds. Interviews with acquaintances from his past painted a picture of a man who was always on the move, always reinventing himself. Former friends and colleagues described him as charming, yet elusive, a man who could weave a story so convincing that even the most skeptical would believe it. Authorities uncovered a trail of deception that spanned decades and states, revealing that Christian had been involved in various scams, including art fraud and financial schemes. His ability to adapt and manipulate was nothing short of extraordinary. The media frenzy that followed the revelation was intense. Headlines screamed the shocking truth. Clark Rockefeller was a fraud. News outlets delved into the bizarre and fascinating life of Christian Carl Gerhardt's writer, exposing his lies and the lives he had shattered along the way. The shocking revelation not only unmasked Clark Rockefeller, but also highlighted the vulnerabilities in a society where appearances can be deceiving. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now exposed as a master con artist, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. As investigators delved deeper into the past of Christian Carl Gerhardt's writer, they stumbled upon a chilling connection that would add a sinister twist to his already convoluted story. This wasn't just a tale of fraud and deception. It was about to become something far darker. In the early 1980s, a young couple named John and Linda Sohus mysteriously vanished from their home in San Marino, California. For years, their disappearance remained an unsolved mystery, a cold case that haunted the community. But as authorities pieced together Christian's trail of deception, a shocking link emerged. Christian, then going by the name Christopher Chichester, had been renting a guest house on the Sohus property at the time of their disappearance. When John Sohus's remains were discovered in 1994, buried in the backyard of the property, suspicion immediately fell on the enigmatic tenant who had vanished without a trace shortly after the couple went missing. Authorities began to re-examine the unsolved murder, and the evidence pointed squarely at Christian. Witnesses recalled seeing a man matching his description driving John's truck across the country. Fingerprints and other forensic evidence started to paint a damning picture. The revelation of Christian's potential involvement in the murder of John Sohus added a chilling dimension to his story. This wasn't just a man who deceived and manipulated. He was now a prime suspect in a decades-old murder case. The stakes were higher, and the intrigue intensified as the true extent of his darkness began to unfold. The media frenzy escalated as new details emerged, revealing a calculated and cold-hearted individual capable of far more than just lies and scams. The story of Clark Rockefeller, or rather Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, took on a new level of horror, highlighting the dangerous lengths to which he would go to protect his fabricated identity. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with anticipation. The trial of Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, alias Clark Rockefeller, was a spectacle that captivated the nation. This was a man who had lived a life of extraordinary deception, and now, justice was finally within reach. The prosecution painted a damning picture of Christian, detailing his web of lies and his potential involvement in the murder of John Sohus. Witnesses took the stand one by one, recounting their encounters with the man they knew as Clark Rockefeller. Forensic experts presented evidence that linked him to the crime scene, and the jury listened intently as the narrative of his dark past unfolded. Christian's defense team, however, attempted to sow seeds of doubt. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, that the timeline was murky, and that the prosecution's case was built on assumptions rather than hard facts. They portrayed their client as a misunderstood individual, a man who had made mistakes but was not a murderer. But the weight of the evidence was overwhelming. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer was convicted of murder, fraud, and multiple counts of identity theft. The judge's gavel came down with a resounding thud, sealing his fate. Sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, Christian's story seemed to reach its conclusion. Yet, questions lingered. How many more lies had he told? How many more lives had he disrupted with his deceit? The full extent of his deception may never be known, but one thing was clear. The man who had fooled the world would spend the rest of his days behind bars. Why was Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, alias Clark Rockefeller, able to deceive so many for so long? To understand this, we must delve into the psychology of deception and the mind of an imposter. Gerhardt's writer was more than just a con artist. He was a master manipulator. His charm, intelligence, and ability to read people allowed him to craft convincing personas. But what drove him to live a life of lies? Experts suggest that Gerhardt's writer exhibited traits of narcissistic personality disorder. Narcissists often have an inflated sense of self-importance and a deep need for admiration. They are skilled at manipulating others to achieve their goals, often without remorse. For Gerhardt's writer, posing as a Rockefeller wasn't just about financial gain. It was about fulfilling a deep psychological need to be seen as powerful and important. But why do people fall for imposters like him? One reason is cognitive bias. Humans have a tendency to believe what they want to be true, especially if it aligns with their desires or expectations. The allure of being associated with a Rockefeller, for instance, can cloud judgment and make people overlook red flags. Gerhardt's writer also exploited the concept of social proof. By surrounding himself with influential people and adopting their mannerisms, he created an illusion of legitimacy. When others see someone accepted by a trusted group, they're more likely to accept that person as well. The case of Clark Rockefeller fascinates us not just because of his crimes, but because it reveals the vulnerabilities in human psychology. It shows how easily our perceptions can be manipulated, and how the need for validation can drive someone to extraordinary lengths. As the dust settled from the shocking revelations of Clark Rockefeller's true identity, the world was left grappling with the aftermath. The case of Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, alias Clark Rockefeller, didn't just expose a master manipulator. It became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder of the fragility of trust and the devastating effects of deception. For those who were deceived, the emotional and psychological toll was immense. Friends and family who had once looked up to him, who had shared their lives and secrets with him, were left shattered. The realization that the man they knew was a complete fabrication led to deep feelings of betrayal and confusion. Many struggled to reconcile the charming, intelligent man they had known with the criminal mastermind who had deceived them. His ex-wife, Sandra Boss, perhaps suffered the most, having lived with him for years, believing in his fabricated Rockefeller lineage. She was blindsided by the truth. The custody battle for their daughter, which ultimately led to his exposure, left scars that would take years to heal. The emotional trauma of discovering that her marriage was built on lies was compounded by the public scrutiny and media frenzy that followed. But the ripple effects extended beyond personal relationships. The Clark Rockefeller case sent shockwaves through the legal and financial communities. Institutions and individuals began to scrutinize their processes, realizing how easily they had been duped by a well-crafted persona. It highlighted the importance of due diligence and the need for skepticism, even when dealing with seemingly reputable individuals. The story also served as a grim reminder of the dark side of ambition and the lengths to which some will go to achieve their desires. It forced society to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of deception and the vulnerabilities inherent in human psychology. As we reflect on the legacy of Clark Rockefeller, we are reminded that trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. The case serves as a warning to us all. Appearances can be deceiving, and the truth, no matter how well hidden, will eventually come to light. As we draw the curtains on the astounding saga of Clark Rockefeller, one question lingers. Could something like this happen again? The tale of Christian Karl Gerhardt's writer, a man who hid in plain sight, living a fabricated life under the guise of one of America's most prestigious names, is a chilling reminder of the depths of human deception. For years, he maneuvered through life with a false identity, leaving a trail of shattered trust and broken relationships in his wake. His ability to convince everyone around him of his fabricated Rockefeller lineage speaks volumes about the power of charm and the vulnerability of human perception. But how did he manage to hide in plain sight for so long? Was it the allure of the Rockefeller name, or the sheer audacity of his lies that blinded those around him? And as we ponder these questions, we must also ask ourselves, in an age of information, where backgrounds can be checked with a few clicks, is it still possible for someone to weave such an intricate web of deceit? The legacy of Clark Rockefeller serves as a stark reminder to remain vigilant, to question what seems too good to be true, and to understand that trust, once broken, is a fragile commodity. As we end this chapter, we leave you with these thoughts and invite you to reflect on the nature of deception and the lengths to which some will go to live a lie. Could the next Clark Rockefeller be hiding among us? Only time will tell. Hit that follow button for more jaw-dropping true crime stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.